Hey everybody, it's your boy Steve here. Thanks for stopping by. I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to get right into this. I'm going over my panel, my linen panel with acrylic paint. It's kind of a yellow ochre. Wipe it down, let it dry. This is the photo reference I'm going to be using, and I don't follow it necessarily for color or exactly for the composition, but I do use it for tones, for getting the values right. And sometimes for me to be able to follow the drawing or the photo, I'll put a little X in the middle like this, and then I'll be able to at least get to the rocks in the place where I want them to be. I've started out with very thin down paint. I believe this was a kind of a violet color, and over the yellow it comes out kind of reddish like this. And then what I'll do is I'll wipe back some of the areas that are catching a little bit more of the light. That way I'm not slogging through, even though this is very thin paint, I don't want to have to fight my paints. So I'll wipe it back just to let me remember where exactly I want that trail of light to be. And when I start in with a paint on something like this that's going to be very bright, I will put the whites in first. I normally don't do that. Normally I'll work from dark to light. But this is the best way in order to get that real bright white and not have to try and paint over something else. I will let in places some of that yellow underpainting show through, or the toning of the canvas. But this way I'm getting a pattern of my lights and a pattern of my darks, and then I'll be able to follow that through as I go. Obviously I can make changes to this, but this is just a general roadmap for me. When I'm working here towards the center, when you're working a backlit subject, where that light is the brightest part, that light all bleeds around the thing that's in front of it, which in this case is the rocks. And so you need to make sure that in order to get that effect, you keep those darks in that area very light. You know, you want to keep them just a tone darker than the whites. And then as you go away from the brightest areas, then you have more of those shadow colors and mid-tones coming back in. But if you follow this kind of a template, you're not going to go very far wrong on it. And you kind of notice here that I'm keeping the paint very thin. I'm not thinning it down very much. I might dip my brush into my turpentine, but wipe it off on a paper towel just to get a little bit of that on there to make those paints behave a little more like I want them to. Not very much at all, because if I thin out my paint too much, I'm not going to be able to then a la prima, in one sitting, go back and put that second layer, or third layer, or fourth layer of paint over the top of it. So much of painting is learning how to control your paint and what viscosity, what kind of thickness that you like to work in. And you'll get that with brush mileage. You just keep going and you'll find that, okay, this works for me, this doesn't. I fought for a long time putting down too much turpentine and then having to wait for it to set up a little bit. But I like working thin, but not super thin where you're just barely scraping the paint on. So, before I get any comments, I've got a little bump that's right above my watch band there on my wrist. And I have people ask me, or tell me, your watch band is too tight. No, it's a cyst. I've had it since high school. Doesn't bother me. And doesn't bother my doc. So anyway, I thought I'd call that out before you felt like you needed to comment. And then it's back to the paper towel, wiping off the areas that are catching a little bit more light so that I can more easily paint in those areas. And then after that, picking up the brush and reestablishing that pattern of light that I want, that kind of brings you down through the painting. Let me talk for a moment about the scene that we're painting. This was a scene that I came across when I was hiking up in Colorado. At the end of the day, beautiful backlit scene. I always just called it backlighting. There is another term that you'll hear it called sometimes, and that's contre-jour, which translates to against the day or even against the light. And that's what I've kind of taken to calling it, because let's face it, I need all the help I can get to sound like I know what I'm talking about in order to be teaching this. But anywho, it's the kind of lighting where the sun is placed directly behind your subject. Or, saying it another way, you place your subject right in front of the sunlit sky. And in this case, my subject happens to be this waterfall, just in case you weren't paying attention. So, how do I paint this contre-jour or backlighting effect? Well, one tip is to not make your colors too intense. Now, I know right now the colors are rather intense, but I will, as I go along, I'll keep knocking them back. But I'm pushing what you see in the original photograph to make it a much more of a warm scene, more inviting. The second thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you don't have too much contrast in your scene, because that contrast is done away with by having this light that's behind your subject bleed around and into everything. And therefore it really subdues the kind of contrast that you would get. Now, the further away you get from that light source, the more contrast you're going to get. Definitely, as you're painting in, you need to rein in your desire to put in a lot of contrast. You're going to be able to get what you need to make this scene read. Nature gives us everything we need, so don't worry about pushing things as far as contrast goes. You notice right here, I'm knocking back that intense color that I had by putting in a much cooler violet, and that's going to help the scene feel like it is infused with this light. Since we were out for a hike, my wife and I, when we came across this subject, I obviously took a photo, but the other thing that I remember doing is asking her if I could take 5 minutes to just stand there and make mental notes as to what the light was doing, so that when I got back to the studio I could paint it. And I do that because I know that the photo won't capture what's there. You have a better chance now that you've got Lightroom and Photoshop. I could have changed this scene, this photo, over to what I remember, but I wanted to show you what normally the photo out of the camera will look like, and it's nothing like what I want to end up with. So it's a jumping off point. I use it for my values, but as far as color goes, I've got that locked into my head, knowing what I want to do, and not being a slave to the camera or the photo. Oftentimes taking mental notes is just as good, well, not just as good. Let's not go crazy. This is something that you can do if you can't stop and paint a scene. Oftentimes I'll have a little notebook with me, and I'll just do a little doodle of the sketch, and I'll write little color notes for myself so that I can recall later just exactly what was going on. So anyways, so while I was talking, I went ahead and put in some of the greens that you see where the leaves are and the branches. And now I'm just kind of going to go ahead and add in some very thick white paint. You can see I've really loaded my brush up there. I put it down and leave it alone. Normally I wait until the end of a painting to add this really thick paint, but since I'm going to be painting sunlit leaves in front of that, I thought I'd go ahead and put in my thick paint now, lock it in, and then I don't have to worry about whether or not I can get back to that nice clean white. It's not exactly a white. It's kind of a, there's a lot of yellow in it, but it looks white compared to everything else. Hey, I just thought I'd mention, if you're looking for something to do, you could hit the subscribe button. No pressure, but it would make you one of the cool kids. Just saying. Up on top there, I went ahead and smoothed that out to make it look like there was mist coming off of the top of the waterfall. And I just continue to work everything. I'm continuing to add that white in, just where the sunlight is kissing the top of that water and it's splashing up a bit. And that's an effect that I will continue to work on because it is the life of the painting. If it doesn't have that, I may as well just go and watch Wheel of Fortune or something. You know, let me just say, how do they get some of these answers? And not that I watch it, but, you know, there's like 2 letters visible on the puzzle and they solve it. It's just not normal. Moving on. Now you'll notice that when I'm painting here, you can kind of see me up there in the corner. I'm mostly looking at what I'm painting, and I'll just occasionally glance up at the reference just so that I can make sure that I'm on track, but I'm really orchestrating the painting so that it looks the way I want it to look, and adding a lot of light on the leaves that are up there in that one particular area, which compositionally helps to lead you down into that bright area. Now I'm starting to add some of these outer leaves that are really being lit up by the sun here. It's important that you don't have too hard of an edge or too dark of a value when something like this, where your leaves are being backlit. It'll look wrong if you do. As I'm doing this, I'll go in and with my pinky finger or one of my fingers, I'll soften those edges, because if you have too hard of an edge where you don't want it, that's where your eye is absolutely going to go to. So lighting this down on the top now, adding kind of an orangey greenish light, because that sunlight is playing on that green of the leaves. And so I just continue to play with this back and forth, the light and the shadow areas, until I get something that I'm very happy with. If I'm not happy with it, I will continue to paint it, or I'll scrape it off. If it gets too thick, I can scrape it off and then come back to it. But this is where we are. I go ahead and I put it in the frame. I've done this on some of my other paintings. If you've watched the channel before, I put it in the frame and try and stay away from getting too close to the edge. But I can see what it's going to look like in the frame that I'm going to put it in, and then I can make adjustments so that it sings in that particular frame. You need to make sure that you don't have paint on your fingers. Don't ask me how I know that. But yeah, I will go ahead and paint up to the edge of that, and then once I get something that I like, I take it out of the frame and then I paint the rest of the effect over to the edge of the painting. It's just a way that I make sure that my painting is going to look good in the frame that I've chosen for it, and it's just as important that the frame works with the painting that I have it in, because we've all seen paintings that you love the painting but you hate the frame, and I try and avoid this just by doing some of the painting in the frame. Now I'm using a soft synthetic flat brush. I think this is a Scholastic Wonder White. It's a number 8 that I make to a thin flat surface on my palette and to get these lines. Sometimes I'll use a liner or a rigger brush, but I like the look of this stepping my way up a branch, and I feel like I have a little bit more control. Here's a little tip for you. Don't paint your branches too dark. Even if it's not just backlit, I'll see a lot of people where they paint their branches really dark, and it's not necessary, especially where the branch is out by itself. You know, once it goes past where all the leaves are, you can make it just a tone darker than the leaves, and sometimes when it gets out away from the leaves, it can be the same tone as the leaves. Or, you know, if you do paint it too dark, you're just going to kill the effect. So be careful about that. So now really we're coming down the home stretch. Right now I'm just adjusting some things. I'm toning some areas down that I feel like are a little bit too jumpy. I'm trying to soften some of the jumpiness that goes on in your leaves and your branches. You really don't need much detail in there, especially since that's not where you want your eye to go. So be careful how much detail you put down in there. And for those of you who are still listening, put down in the comments the name of your favorite artist, just one word, and we'll see we'll see how many of you are still listening. Okay. Just putting a few more touches on the top edges of some of these rocks. Knocking back this area a little bit with a little bit of yellow so it sits back where I want it to. And I think we'll be just about there. We can put this puppy to bed. I really hope you found this helpful, and you're going to want to dive into doing one of these of your own. Just remember, start with thinner paint, go to thicker paint as you go along, and look at the whole painting while you're working on it, not just one area. And for goodness sake, keep your edges soft. How many times do I have to tell you? So there we go. There's the finished painting. I do appreciate you sticking with me all the way through this. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them down in the comments section. And thank you, George. This painting has found its forever home. Much appreciated. Well, I think we've come to the end. If you like what you see, I'd appreciate it if you give me a like or subscribe, but well, you know all that. But until the next video, I'll see you all down the road.